And welcome to another episode of Around the 412 Fantasy Football Podcast. You guys are probably thrown off, like, when are these guys recording? It's been tough. Like, the plan was to do this every single week. I did not anticipate getting sick in September and it lasting, still kind of, it's not fully out of my system. I really just have, like, the ear thing going on now, but, like, the cough isn't fully gone yet. Enough about me. It is what it is. I'm here. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be here with my man, Donnie. As always, Donnie, what do we got going on?
Not much, man. Like we were talking about before we started recording, it's week 11 already, which is crazy to think about. There's a lot of football that's been played. There's still a lot more to go. Fantasy playoffs are coming up around the corner here pretty soon, so I'm really excited.
Yeah, and speaking of that, we're not going to talk about it right away, but a little bit of foreshadowing what we got coming up later in the show. We're introducing a new segment, I guess you could say, but it's only going to be like this week. The trade deadline, if it hasn't passed yet, it's probably coming up, so these are some guys you should target. You want to look ahead to the fantasy football playoffs to see what those matchups are looking like for those guys. Who should you be targeting if teams are like low on a guy, maybe they're selling them. These are the guys you got to jump on if people are just saying, you know what, this guy hasn't done much for me. I'm looking to make a move here before the trade deadline. Who should you be valuing that those people aren't? So we have that coming up a little later in the show. But we have our regular stuff to talk about. First and foremost, we are part of the Pod Hub Network. You can head on over to podhubnetwork.com and find us and find all the other shows right there. You can follow them on any social media platform. Follow all the other shows. Like I said, you go to Pod Hub Network, all the shows will pop down. Us and all the other ones, all great shows, all great people running those shows, so make sure to do that. We are sponsored by Keats Barbershop. Keats Barbershop, located at 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. An old-fashioned barbershop, open 10 to 7, Tuesday through Friday, Saturday 9 to 4, owned and operated by Christian Circle. Every Tuesday, he does $5 off for military personnel, first responders, and nurses. Christian himself served in the Army, so obviously doing that for those people is his way of giving back. Speaking of giving back, he's got Keats Christmas Drive going on from right now until December 20th. He actually just had an event this past Saturday. He's already got so many toys. Essentially, it's a toy drive. You take over some type of toy, monetary donation, whatever it might be, and you get $5 off your next hair service, whether it be that day or in the future. To go along, keeping it with the Christmas spirit, we got Rockin' Around the 412 going on as Around the 412. And I'm proud to say that we've reached our initial goal, which was $1,500. We've raised that as of this past week. So very happy because the goal was originally set at $1,500. So when we started this, it was actually, kind of when Donnie was first coming into the fold, and it was still just me, Beefy, and Herb, and we thought, there's three of us at the time, so we wanted to do $1,500, essentially have each one of us find the family, and, $500 a family to help make their Christmas better. So, just within this past week, we've raised close to like $1,000, so it's like really kicking up now. And I want to give a shout out to my boy Jeff Hartley with the Pirates, who donated himself $500. So that was obviously a huge part of that. But yeah, he himself essentially paid for a family's Christmas through us. So big shout out to him. Big shout out to everybody that's donating and for donating. If you guys saw our pinned tweet on Twitter or you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. All the prizes are right there. We're going to be giving away like 6 jerseys actually, 3 pairs of tickets, including 2 Penguin games, 1 future Pirate game. I'm a big Jersey guy, so a Jersey's got to be in there as well, of your choice. And then a $50 Total Sports Enterprises gift card, which it doesn't have to be sports. I don't know if you know anything about that company, but they do like, autographed memorabilia from like movies and stuff like that as well. So, but anyway, Rock Around the 412 Year 2 is in full effect. It's really ramping up now with, essentially a month left until I really got to go and get the stuff for these families for Christmas. So check out our pinned tweet and hope to see everybody get involved.
Hell yeah. Can't get better than that, man.
Man, that was a solid, 4 minutes of just talking.
That was, yeah. I was hoping you'd breathe eventually.
I got to get some air now. No, but, all right, jumping into what we're here for now. Like I said, we got a new segment towards the end of the show, but to kick it off, we're going to stick with what we've been doing. So why not just jump right into our top 5 quarterbacks of the week? And I'll start off. It's weird to me that it's not just plug and play Pat Mahomes as number 1 anymore. You're still plugging and playing Pat Mahomes if you have him on your roster. But as the number 1 overall fantasy quarterback, this guy's kind of taken over a top 2 role for me, and he's not number 2 this week. Lamar Jackson going against Houston is my QB1.
Yeah, I have him at my QB1 as well. I mean, you just watch what he did against Cincinnati last week, and it's hard to deny his talent. He's in almost a perfectly curated offense for him. He's going to run the ball 10 to 15 times a game, but he can still go out and sling it for 200, 250 yards, and a quarterback who is lethal as that, both through the air and on the ground, is one of the most valuable things in all of fantasy football. So, while people like to joke and say that he's a running back, when it comes to putting up fantasy points, he definitely is.
Yeah, and whether it's design runs or, nothing's there through his progressions and he takes off, it's valuable. Like you said, whether, you want to joke about him being a running back or whatever that plays the quarterback position, from a fantasy football perspective, there's been really nobody better at that position. And he's feasted. I mean, obviously, quarterbacks are feasting on these teams if they're in, a bottom 5 against the quarterback matchup. But Houston's been very bad giving up fantasy points to quarterbacks. Lamar Jackson has absolutely feasted on teams like that. Look at the first 2 weeks that he had and the week against Cincinnati. All teams that are in bottom 5 giving up points to quarterbacks. Houston's right there as well. So we're looking at another huge week for Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, I think he's entering almost matchup-proof territory at this point. As the season goes on, him and his offense are starting to definitely click and bind together. The Ravens aren't so much a just strictly running back team now. They're starting to let Lamar kind of cut the ties loose and everything. And like you said, a 20-yard run from Lamar Jackson is the equivalent of a 50-yard pass from Tom Brady. It's still the same amount of fantasy points for either or. So he's definitely on a tear. And yeah, at this point, he's kind of entering that Christian McCaffrey, RB quarterback 1, for whatever week, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and you mentioned being matchup proof, and that's very true. And it's also, if you look at the way he was being drafted, was kind of just like an upside quarterback too. You probably weren't drafting him to be your number 1 quarterback, even though with what he can bring on the ground. I mean, regardless of what you think of him as an actual football player, you think he's a quarterback, you think he's a running back that just happens to play the quarterback position. We're talking about fantasy football, and I think that a lot of the people were undervaluing what he brings to the table when they were drafting.
Yeah, definitely. I was in a league where I took Andrew Luck, as my first quarterback, and then the next round later I took Lamar Jackson. It's almost perfect what you just described. I took a chance on Lamar as a potential, high ceiling quarterback too. I certainly didn't expect him to play like this, so it's nuts.
Yeah, and even it's bad on me, but pre-draft, we were talking about Kyler Murray, what he brings to the table with being able to run the ball. And not that he hasn't, but it's like we already had a guy in the league that did that, and we weren't talking about him.
Right.
So, but anyway, like you said, he's pretty much matchup-proof, and if he wasn't, this is a great matchup anyway. So, Lamar Jackson against Houston, the consensus between the two of us, QB1. My QB2 is going to be Drew Brees against Tampa Bay. Drew Brees coming off a miserable game. I mean, let's just put it like it is for New Orleans overall against Atlanta, a game that they should not have lost at home against the 1-win Falcons at the time. I think they're going to be coming in here looking for redemption against the Buccaneers, and I think that the offense has an absolute field day.
Yeah, I have Breeze as my number 5 quarterback. I'm a little bit wary after last week's performance. The defense doesn't necessarily get worse whenever they travel to Tampa Bay this week. So we'll see how they respond. I believe they were coming off a bye week. So, while you expect them to be prepared, they win a week without, playing football and kind of being in that same motion. So, we'll see what happens there. My quarterback, too, is actually going to be Dak Prescott versus the Detroit Lions. The Lions haven't exactly been the best defense when it comes to allowing points to quarterbacks. Dak Prescott has really taken a step up this year, whether you can attribute it to Kellen Moore or just, kind of generally growing. But we saw Dak step up a little bit whenever Zeke was being shut down last week against the Minnesota Vikings. Prescott's not the guy who's going to throw for 300 yards every game, and he's not a guy like Lamar Jackson who's going to get you, 5 to 8 points rushing on the ground. But, he's certainly a guy who can do both.
Right. I agree. I mean, I have Dak Prescott in my top 5. I don't want to really release that exactly yet where I have him, but I'll get to that a little later. I have at my QB3 Pat Mahomes going against the Chargers. So he's coming off the kneecap injury, and he led the league in passing last week. Coming off that injury, he threw for what, like 454?
It was like it was like 440 or 450.
Yeah, so put up ridiculous numbers. Even though Kansas City did get upset by Tennessee, now they're going against the Chargers, who still don't have Derwin James back on that back end. The Chargers, one of the surprise teams, not in a non-good way this year. I mean, they were expected, based off last year, to once again compete for a playoff spot, maybe give the Chiefs a run for their money in the division, and it just hasn't happened. They've been terrible, and I think Pat Mahomes and Tyreek Hill continue to light it up against the Chargers.
Yeah, when Patrick Mahomes is healthy, he's definitely one of the best quarterbacks in the league, if not the best. We saw last week that the injury shouldn't be any concern for fantasy owners moving forward, and I think going against the Chargers defense in an international game, because they're playing in Mexico next week.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's all but set to kind of pop off. It actually might have been more beneficial for them to play in Los Angeles, just due to the poor fan support there. But
yeah.
Mahomes is healthy. All of his weapons are healthy right now. So, as long as he's got Andy Reid, you can always expect a minimum of like 20 to 25 fantasy points for him. And that's on a bad day for Mahomes. So my quarterback three is actually going to be Josh Allen versus the Miami Dolphins this week. Josh Allen, I will eat my words on him. I didn't think he was going to be a very good professional quarterback. I thought he had a little bit of issues with his accuracy and touch on the ball. But he's one of the more athletic guys in the league when it comes to the quarterback position. Kind of same boat as Prescott. He's not as gifted as a quarterback as Dak Prescott is, but if nothing's open, he's going to take off and he's going to get you between 5 to 8 points a game for Lamar, somewhere around that area. But you go and you are on the road against you're at home against Miami Dolphins defense, one of the piss poor defenses in the league, especially after trading who to the Pittsburgh Steelers for a first round pick next year. Thank you, by the way, Miami. We'll send you another one just in case. But yeah, Josh Allen, great matchup. His average, I think, 20 to 22 points per game. A really awesome matchup against the Miami Dolphins this week. So he's definitely my third quarterback on this list.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean that's probably the top streaming option, I would say, this week if you have like a quarterback on a bye and for some reason he's available. I mean, once again, you talk about a guy that's undervalued from a fantasy perspective because of the way that he's valued as a real-life football player. But he gets fantasy points. And, I mean, if we're talking about fantasy football, why do you care about how good he actually is?
Right.
I don't really understand the hate towards Josh Allen, at least from a fantasy football perspective. The only question that I would have would be, what's the weather going to be like, being that it's at Buffalo and the middle of November? If it's
that is true. I have not checked it. I don't play on Yahoo like you do, so I don't get the weather updates.
Yeah, I mean, if it's going to be, decent conditions, obviously going against Miami, that's about as favorable as a matchup as you can get. Even when they play prevent defense, they only have 3 guys on as defensive backs. So, that was a shout out to Deontay Johnson's right before halftime score against them on Monday Night Football. But the only question I would have is if they're expecting snow there. And even then, I mean, maybe Josh Allen just adds more with his legs than normal. I don't know. But I like the pick. I like throwing Josh Allen against Miami, and there's a top 5 play. Because you're going to look like a genius when it happens.
Anybody against the Miami Dolphins can be considered a top 5 pick. So, actually, maybe not. Maybe not, because they went on the road and stole a win from the Indianapolis Colts last week. So,
yeah, that's true. I mean, they play hard. They just don't have the talent. My number 4 quarterback is, as you mentioned, Dak Prescott going against the Lions. You have him a little bit higher than I do. I still do like the matchup. Him and Amari Cooper have been magic for each other ever since Amari got there last year. And even, Randall Cobb has looked a little rejuvenated there. Michael Gallup is a beast that nobody talks about as their second wide receiver. And as you mentioned, Detroit has not been good at preventing fantasy points to quarterbacks. Ezekiel Elliott has kind of been up and down, and even in that game last week against Minnesota, they opted to go with Ezekiel Elliott instead of putting the ball in Dak Prescott's hands, which ultimately I feel like cost them the game. Hopefully they don't make that mistake again. but I like Dak Prescott here. I have him as my QB4.
Yeah, it was interesting because the Cowboys never really got momentum going on the ground. Like Zeke was swallowed up for the entire game last week, but like you alluded to, when the game was on the line, they tried to force the ball with Zeke, whether it be on the run with that like 3rd and 2 running play out of the shotgun, or that 4th down play where they tried to run Zeke on that little out route, and the linebacker just made a really good play on it. I don't know what happened because the first couple of weeks for Dak were amazing. I mean, the Cowboys, I believe, started 3-0, where they were running on like a 3-game win streak sometime early in the season. And I don't know what happened. I don't know if Jason Garrett took control of the offense. I don't know if Kellen Morris is being, really controlling of the play calling right now. I'm not really sure. But, whatever they were doing earlier in the season, they need to go back to that because they're starting to drop football games and it's not good.
Yeah, I saw a shout out to your boy Logan Bell saying that pretty much the fact that they paid Ezekiel Elliott what they did cost him that game. Like they were just forcing him touches because of what his contract is.
Definitely the highest paid running back in the league if you make him that. But man, not a good look for them. So we'll see.
Right. Who was your quarterback for?
Patrick Mahomes.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, so I had Mahomes 4 and then Breeze at 5.
Okay. And my QB5 don't necessarily love the matchup, but once again, a guy that's going to add points with his legs, and he has one of the better weapons in the NFL. Deshaun Watson going against Baltimore. As I mentioned, I'm not in love with the matchup against Baltimore, but I mean, Baltimore's secondary isn't been that great. It has been improved since acquiring Marcus Peters, which I'll eat my words on. I didn't think that it was the best acquisition, but he's fit there really well. I guess the scheme just didn't really fit him with the Rams because the move has paid off for both sides going to Baltimore, at least to this point. But I'm still not shying away from Watson as a top 5 play. I mean, if Deshaun Watson's your quarterback, you're playing him. I don't know who your second option would be for you to sit him. And like I mentioned, he has one of the better weapons in the NFL in DeAndre Hopkins. So still a top 5 play for me, and I put him right at 5.
Yeah, he was a borderline top 5 play for me. I mean, it's Deshaun Watson. You can never really count him out of the game. And like you said, if you have Deshaun Watson as one of your quarterbacks, unless you have a guy like Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, you're never really going to sit Deshaun Watson on a week-to-week basis. Not really crazy about this matchup, even though the Ravens defense at times has been really susceptible to big-time offenses. We saw earlier in the season they gave up back-to-back 500-yard games, and who's to say the Texans can't do that this week?
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the running backs. I do have a surprise in here, especially where I've put him. So, but first things first, I have Christian McCaffrey as my number 1.
Yep.
Doing against Atlanta. Very good matchup, and it's Christian McCaffrey, so even if it wasn't, he'd be a top 3 play regardless of who he's going against. But Christian McCaffrey going against Atlanta is my number 1.
Yeah, he manages to pull 25 points out of his ass like he's a fucking magician. I don't know how he does it. He is one of the most efficient running backs we've seen in quite some time. A lot of people thought whenever Cam Newton went down that Kyle Allen would hurt its fantasy stock, but you can make an argument that the arrival of Allen has actually boosted McCaffrey's stock up a little bit. He's been able to stay healthy. He's been able to maintain a hefty workload, and all I have to say is, wow, crazy, just crazy the output he has.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious on something because let me look at this game log. So he has 3 games this year where he doesn't have 100 yards rushing, and that's just rushing. Because you think about what he does receiving the ball too. There are a couple games where he had 2 or 3 receptions. He also has 2 games where he had 10. So he's the guy that doesn't even have to rush for 100 yards as a running back, and he's still, like you mentioned, you can count on him for 20 plus points.
Yeah.
Whether he's running for 100 yards or not.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just game flow or scheming, or if we want to give props to whoever's calling the plays in Carolina. But wow, I mean, He's certainly a magnet for the football. He does crazy things when he gets the football in his hand. We've seen him go off for, multiple 60, 70, 80-yard runs this year. So, you can make an argument that besides Lamar and Russell Wilson, that he's one of the front runners for MVP this season.
Yeah. In looking at the fantasy points, so 37, 6, 26, 28, 44, 19, 25, 36, 23. And the thing is,
sign me up.
he's matched or beaten projections in all but week 2 against Tampa Bay.
Wow.
Which was a Thursday night game, and that was the Cam played in that game, and that was essentially could be the end of Cam's tenure.
Yeah, that was a terrible game to watch. Yeah. Now that I think about it, yeah.
But okay, so my running back 2, and this is where I think you're going to be a little bit surprised. Josh Jacobs going against the Cincinnati Bengals. Obviously a fantastic matchup going against the Bengals. They're trying, even with Jalen Richard there, they're trying to get him more involved in the passing game. He had 3 receptions last week. We know what he can do on the ground. If talking about fantasy log for Christian McCaffrey, let's look up Josh Jacobs real quick. And you see his 23, 9, 4, 11, 27, 14, 9, 24, 17 and a half. Once again, a guy that has beaten projections in pretty much every week, all but 2. He's matched or beaten projections. Those 2 weeks were week 2 and 3. So since that time, he's matched or beaten. And in the last 2 weeks, going against the second worst defense against the run and the 8th worst, he's gotten 24 points and 17 points. This week, Cincinnati's giving up the 4th most fantasy points to running backs. So I expect him to have another 18 to 20 point game.
Yeah, I have Jacobs in my top 5 as well. I don't certainly have him number 2, but I feel like all of these top 5 guys can almost be interchangeable. Whether it be the 1 spot or the 5 spot. Josh Jacobs, a super intriguing matchup, like you said, going against the Bengals, who just haven't been able to stop anybody this year. Let's be real. Like you said, they're trying to get him more involved in the passing game, and he was already somewhat involved in the passing game early on in the season. So I think even though, like you alluded to, Jalen Richard's there, Josh Jacobs is going to have kind of full control of his offense by the time the fantasy playoffs hit. So who's your running back 3?
Who's your RB2?
So my RB1 was McCaffrey, and my RB2 is Dalvin Cook going against the Broncos defense. If Dalvin Cook is able to put up crazy numbers like he did against a Dallas front 7 that's extremely talented, I'm pretty excited to see what he could do against a somewhat less talented Denver front. The Vikings are, I believe, on the road this week, so they're not going to be too inclined to pass the ball around, especially on a not susceptible Denver secondary, but certainly not the worst in the league as well. Dalvin Cook is starting to kind of not be matchup proof, because we have seen him have somewhat not great games this year. But so whenever Dalvin Cook pops off, he certainly goes off for 30, 40 points a game. And just the volume he's hitting at this point is crazy. So I expect that to continue in Denver.
Yeah, he's got 7 of the 10 weeks he's hit 20-plus points. So he's actually my RB3, so that's a nice segue. Is your RB2 to my RB3. As you mentioned, the matchup with Denver, they give up the 19th most, so it's more towards the back end than it is, but it's more middle of the pack than anything. He's projected 20.5 points. I mean, the volume is going to be there. He's also caught at least 1 pass in every game, so you can count on that as well. He's not just running the ball. Once again, you talked about matchup-proof guys, and it's kind of weird that, looking at like the 2018 version of Dalvin Cook, and even before that like finally everything's come together that we can call Dalvin Cook like a matchup-proof guy. I mean, most people were taking him as like an RB2 and they were weary about it. But he's an RB1. He's the 5th overall player in fantasy this year. And even against Denver, I mean, I still don't hate the matchup. As you mentioned, Dallas is a better front 7, and he had 27.8 fantasy points against them. So I think that you can pencil him in for another 18 plus.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. I think people were wary of Cook going into drafts this year simply because of injury history.
Yeah.
We saw what Dalvin Cook could do when he was healthy, and that was the allure of taking him, like the second or third round, depending on how many people are in your league. It was just the injury history that really worried people. Latavius Murray was gone. The Vikings kind of tipped their hat to wanting to run the ball more and commit to Dalvin Cook in 2019 if he was healthy, and that's panned out to be true so far.
Nobody has, and looking ahead, nobody has a better playoff lineup than him. If you look ahead to weeks 13 through 16, which are typically playoffs, or whether it's 14 through 16, whatever it might be, so he faces Seattle, which is once again, a team that's right there with the Broncos that are, they're 20th, so kind of middle of the pack. But then he finishes with Detroit, the Chargers, and Green Bay, which are the second worst, the 8th worst, and the 6th worst against the run. He's going to eat in the fantasy play. He's going to win a championship for teams.
Yep. Yeah, he really will. Props to you if you had the confidence to draft him this year, because I know a lot of people, kind of like myself, were kind of shying away from him. So
yeah, he's my second running back on my one team. I have Saquon as my number one. So
nice.
Okay. So who was your RB3?
RB3 is going to be Zeke going against
Okay.
the Detroit Lions this year. I've talked about this many times on the show. Volume is king, and you're not going to find many guys who get the volume like Ezekiel Elliott does. Rain, sleet, or shine, Ezekiel Elliott is going to get his touches. You're not going to find many games like last week where Zeke is going to be bottled up in the running game, and even if he is, he's still going to get 3 or 4 targets in the passing game as well. They love to run those little running back screens to him out on the flat. So as long as Zeke is healthy, as long as he has a somewhat reputable offensive line, I think he's kind of good for 15 points a game at minimum.
Yeah, and I'm right that he's my 4th running back, even with the kind of disappointing game he had against Minnesota. Minnesota's front seven's pretty good. Obviously when you talk about Ezekiel Elliott, you're still looking for more out of him than that. But I think it comes this week against Detroit. And just to finish mine off, because I have the same one, so that's my 4, and then my number 5 is going to be Leonard Fournette against Indianapolis. Nick Foles expected to come back as the starter. Curious to see how the offense goes. I think they might try to kind of ease him back in, and we could see Leonard Fournette heavily involved this week against Indianapolis. Maybe he catches a good amount of passes. You look at the way that, obviously, the Jaguars don't run their offense the same way as the Steelers, but Jalen Samuels caught 13 passes against the Colts as a running back. So, Leonard Fournette, I think he could catch like 5+ passes against the Colts. And that, along with what he's going to do on the ground, could put him in the top 5 running backs for the week.
No, you're definitely right. And like we talked about a couple weeks ago, there's no other running back in that Jaguars stable to take away passing receptions from Leonard Fournette. And we've seen him, gradually being worked into that pass catcher role as a running back. So, I don't think he's going to get 13 catches.
No.
Samuels did, but definitely it's reasonable to expect like 4 or 5 from him. Oh man. So running back 4, this is going to surprise you a lot.
Oh, I'm ready.
And this is banking on if he's healthy. So if he's healthy, James Conner versus the Cleveland Browns.
Okay.
Conner's output. Let me bring it up for you really quick because he's been banged up the last couple of years, and that's really no secret to anybody in the fantasy realm. But James Conner, whenever he's been healthy, has actually put up fairly good numbers. So his numbers, whenever healthy, I'll start from week 4 because that's really whenever Randy Fichtner got his head out of his ass. 26, 11, 30, 23 were his last 4 fantasy outputs before being sidelined for the last 2 games. The Browns' defense is kind of middle of the road for me. I mean, there's talent almost everywhere in the depth chart when it comes to the Browns' defense, but they don't necessarily limit teams both through the air or on the ground as well. I mean, they're a 3-6 football team right now. James Conner kind of gets it done through the air and on the ground as well, like we've talked about. He's good for, I want to say, like 5 or 6 catches a game, just depending on Mason Rudolph and the game flow. The Steelers don't necessarily push the ball downfield as much as they possibly could. I don't think they're necessarily fully trusting Rudolph quite yet. So with a healthy James Conner, I think they're going to try to ride him on a grimy Thursday night game.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like you said, it's all about the health with him. Those guys, for the most part, with the exception of him, are going to have just played on Sunday. So as you mentioned, as long as he's healthy, he's going to be the most well rested.
Right.
So you got to ride that workhorse.
Definitely, yeah. And, if James Conner wants to get paid, he's going to have to stay healthy for the rest of this year and possibly next year as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see about that. And then my RB5 is Josh Jacobs going against the Bengals. We already talked about him. Just a really solid matchup going against the Bengals this week. I think he should easily hit like 17 or 18 points.
Yeah. There's guys that obviously, regardless of who they're going against, it's a volume reason that you put them in the top 5. With Josh Jacobs, it's more about the matchup. But I think that the volume is going to be there as well. So, yeah, definitely. I think he's got to be in pretty much everybody's top 7. But, yeah, we both had him in our top 5. I'm a little higher on him this week just because of the matchup. But, yeah. Moving over to receivers. As I mentioned, with New Orleans offense, didn't get it done against Atlanta. I think they're in for a field day against Tampa Bay. They're looking for retribution. People might be a little down on them all of a sudden in the NFC, thinking they're not the favorite. Maybe Green Bay's the favorite or whatever. New Orleans is going to look to put a stamp on that, solidify themselves, and I think that they have a field day. Michael Thomas going against Tampa Bay is my wide receiver 1.
Listen, man, I know we talk about people being interchangeable in our 1 through 5 spot every week.
Yeah.
Michael Thomas has to be receiver 1. The numbers he's been able to put up, the consistency, the boom versus bust production he's had in 2019 is absolutely nuts. I think he's already at 1,000 yards this year.
And
really? There's
Wow.
There's still a lot of room to go for Michael Thomas. He plays in an offense where he's the number 1 guy, and granted, there's other weapons on the New Orleans Saints that Drew Brees can go to. Michael Thomas has been the most reliable fantasy football receiver this year, by far.
Yeah, you're right. He has 1,027 yards, which is 103 more than number 2, Mike Evans.
We haven't played Week 11 yet. Nuts, man.
Man, and he just got paid too. So, you think that guys normally sign that contract, and not everybody ends up living up to it, at least not right away. Guys will earn their contract with big play, and then sometimes that's, the best you see of them. They've already hit their peak. Michael Thomas is having a ridiculous season right after signing his contract.
Right, yeah, he's having a contract year after he's done his contract,
And without Brees for a decent period of time.
Yeah, that's the most surprising part, because it's not like Teddy Bridgewater is going out and slinging it like Brees or Patrick Mahomes or anybody like that. So that's really a testament to the talent and kind of workhorse mentality that Michael Thomas brings.
Yep. All right, so obviously he's your number 1 too. My number 2, Julio Jones going against Carolina. That's pretty much his Thanksgiving. That's when he feasts. He's doing against Carolina. So he has a 300-yard game against them in his career. This is the matchup he circles on his calendar, I feel like.
Yep.
Both of them. Both times they play Carolina every season. I think that he's going to go off. Like you mentioned, the only reason that I have Michael Thomas higher is because of what Michael Thomas is doing this year. If I was going just based off matchup, I'd probably have Julio a little higher. But because of what Michael Thomas is doing week in and week out, he's the number 1 receiver until he's not.
Yeah, everything we can say about Michael Thomas, you can almost apply to Julio Jones. Julio Jones is one of the most physically gifted receivers in the league, if not the most physically gifted receiver in the league. His production hasn't always been there this year, and that's kind of disappointing for the talent we know Julio has. But Julio is one of those guys where, any given play he can pop off for, a touchdown. He's faster than almost everybody. He's stronger than almost everybody. As long as he's got Matt Ryan throwing him the ball, I feel like he's almost not guaranteed, but he can almost pop off for 30 or 35 points a week.
Oh, what the heck? Not to cut you off, Mike. The tweet that I sent about us being live just now sent. I don't know why the heck that happened. But we've been here for a while.
I just got it.
Yeah, that's funny.
Wow, I don't know if you saw, but Adam Gase is being brought back for 2020 for the Jets.
Okay, so I saw that they had said that they didn't want to, make a decision on such a short-term trial period, essentially. So they wanted to see a larger body of work. But I kind of just thought that meant the rest of the season, for sure.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I didn't love the hire to begin with, so.
Yeah, Sam. I didn't love the hire, and I didn't love him vocally speaking out against signing Le'Veon Bell, a guy who your franchise poured a lot of money into.
Mm-hmm.
But it's whatever. I don't coach in the National Football League, so I guess I can't sit here and say anything.
Yeah.
So.
My number 3. I went back and forth with pretty much my 3, 4, and 5, jumbling them around. I ultimately decided on Julian Edelman against the Eagles just because of how bad the Eagles secondary is. They are absolute trash. They did nothing to improve it. And I went back and forth here with DeAndre Hopkins just because DeAndre Hopkins is typically a top 3 play for me. But Hopkins, as you mentioned, Julio's numbers, DeAndre Hopkins' numbers haven't been there week in and week out. So for me, this is just about Julian Edelman having a fantastic matchup against Philadelphia.
Yeah, not to give away our over-under segment, but Julian Edelman is kind of one of the guys I had on there. He hasn't hit less than 10 targets since week 4. Sorry, week 5, my bad.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, just absolute crazy. And, it's not like he's dropping a lot of those balls either. His connection with Tom Brady is, one of the best quarterback-receiver connections in the league, and you kind of throw that in a melting pot with the fact that the Eagles, can't cover a blanket right now. Absolutely crazy. So Julian Edelman, I wanted to put him in my top 5, but I feel like a couple more guys are going to have, just bigger, better games than him. One of those guys being my wide receiver 3, Chris Godwin versus the New Orleans Saints. I feel like Godwin and Mike Evans kind of like rotate games, and like, hey, who's going to have like the 40-point game this week? Who's going to have it next week? Evans is going to be followed by Marcus Lattimore, and granted, Lattimore, he's a good corner. Not to take anything away from him, but he's not exactly a lockdown guy. He's not like a Darius Slay. He's not what like an Xavier Rhodes used to be like 2 years ago. So while the Saints are going to primarily focus on Evans, I feel like Eli Apple is going to be drawn against Chris Godwin, and Eli Apple, in my eyes, is garbage. Complete garbage. So I think Chris Godwin is going to feast, and what kind of everybody expects to be a high-scoring affair.
Okay, so it's literally like you just read the reason that I have Chris Godwin in my top 5 as my number 5. Because I'm expecting Marshawn Lattimore and Mike Evans to see a lot of each other, leaving Chris Godwin as the guy to be the one that feasts this week. And I have him as my number 5 due to that. And what I expect to actually be a high-scoring matchup. I mean, I hate throwing my trust into Jameis Winston, but I've done it enough this season where I look like a clown anyway. So I'm going to say that he's able to at least put up some points on New Orleans. And they're going to be trailing into the game. I feel like they're going to be throwing the ball a ton. And Chris Godwin and Mike Evans could both have big days, but I think Chris Godwin has the bigger day due to the fact that it's going to be Lattimore versus Evans for the majority of it. So he's my number 5. So my number 4 is DeAndre Hopkins, as I already kind of revealed with the fact that I was going back and forth between, Edelman, Hopkins, Godwin. In Hopkins, for me, I mean, going against Baltimore, as we talked about with Watson, not necessarily a great matchup going against Baltimore. They've definitely played better since getting Marcus Peters. But every once in a while, they are susceptible to that big play. They can be a little leaky. I think Hopkins gets behind him at least one time. And, I mean, it's DeAndre Hopkins. If you don't have him in your top 5, I don't know. I mean, it's tough for me to keep him out of my top 5.
Fuck you.
He's one of the best receivers in the NFL still. Like I said, he hasn't done it week in and week out consistently this year, as you would hope. If he's probably being drafted as, he's being drafted as one of the top 3 receivers. So,
yeah.
And in a PPR league, you're taking him super high. You really haven't gotten what you expected yet, but I don't know. Maybe this is the time now, right before the playoffs. The offense really gets clicking and they go on a ridiculous run. Either way, DeAndre Hopkins is pretty much going to be my top 5 every week, and this week I have him at number 4.
Yeah, so I actually have him at number 4 as well. Kind of everything that you just said. DeAndre Hopkins is one of the best receivers in the league. Take that and combine that with the fact that he has one of the better quarterbacks in the league, and while the offensive line might not be there and the run support might not be there, there's still going to be ample opportunity for DeAndre Hopkins. Granted, I'm not crazy about the matchup. Baltimore secondary is one of the best in the league, if not the best in the league, but it's still DeAndre Hopkins. You got to roll him out there and see what he does. My wide receiver number 5 this week is going to be Tyreek Hill versus the Chargers. I love Tyreek Hill, boomer bust production. He's not a guy who only runs behind you, even though that's extremely good at what he does. He's a guy that is extremely good at route running. You'll see him just run those like 15-yard dig routes. You'll see him take a slant pass, like a 5-yard slant, and then turn it into like a 60-yard gain. As long as Patrick Mahomes is healthy, Tyreek Hill has the most potential in the league as far as big plays go. And as a fantasy football player, you thrive off of those 6 or 7 point plays.
Yeah, and you mentioned the boomer bust factor, but with Tyreek Hill, it's a lot more boom than bust. I mean, you're talking about pretty much 3 or 4 booms for every one bust game. So,
right, you have one of the fastest guys in the NFL, having the ball thrown to him by a guy who can legitimately swing the ball 70 yards downfield.
Yeah. Okay, so moving to tight ends where we typically have all the same names. My number one this week might not be your number one. I know you love him though. So Hunter Henry against Kansas City. Mm-hmm. From what I was looking at, probably the best matchup. Well, we'll see what happens with Kittle's health. But anyway, Hunter Henry going against Kansas City is a very good matchup. Probably the best one out of the top 7 guys if you're not including George Kittle. But going against Kansas City, I expect the Charger offense to be able to at least keep pace somewhat. I mean, Kansas City's going to be throwing the ball a ton. They're probably going to be up on the scoreboard, so LA's going to have to throw the ball to keep up. I think Hunter Henry's going to be a big beneficiary in that. I mean, Keenan Allen will get his 2. Mike Williams should get his 2. Hunter Henry's, though, is going to be the number 1 red zone option for that offense. Philip Rivers has always loved his tight ends. Hunter Henry came back looking better than expected. Looks fully healthy again. It was kind of discouraging to see him go down and miss some time again. But bounced right back up and caught 2 touchdowns against the Steelers and has been pretty solid ever since. This week against Kansas City, I think that you can give him another touchdown. Pencil him in for another one.
Yeah, like you pointed at, Philip Rivers definitely loves his tight ends. I actually have George Kittle as my tight end 1, just, banking on if he's healthy. It's just the volume he commands in Arizona's defense, specifically against tight ends, it's just second to none, and, not in a good way.
Yeah.
So George Kittle's production can be fantastic this week. We saw the matchup 2 weeks ago where Kittle had himself a really nice game, probably his best game in the season. But Hunter Henry is my tight end too. Like you said, if Kittle isn't healthy, then Hunter gets bumped up to the number 1 on my list. But yeah, it's just a guy who has rebounded from injury so well, and there are some concerns about that going into 2019. And look at his production. He's by far one of Philip Rivers' favorite targets outside of Keenan Allen, and that continues to show. He's been a staple of that Chargers passing attack.
Yeah, and I have Kittle as my number 2, assuming that he plays against the Cardinals. We mentioned how bad the Cardinals are on defense, especially against tight ends. As long as Kittle's out there, he's going to have a monster game. And, yeah, I mean, if I knew for sure he was playing, I probably would have it Kittle 1, Henry 2. And I completely left off the guy that I would probably have number 3, Hooper, because he sprained his MCL, and he's probably going to miss a week or 2 at least.
So Rappaport actually tweeted out like 25 minutes ago as we're recording this that he's going to be out for at least a month.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Well, yeah. See, I got an alert about Hooper, and I saw it changed from out to questionable, so I thought it was actually going to be good news. But yeah, about a month with a sprained MCL, so should get him back for the fantasy playoffs, but. Man, okay. Anyway.
That's a blow. That's a big blow.
Yeah. So my number 3 is going to be Darren Waller against Cincinnati. Darren Waller, one of the nice surprises, especially at such a feeble position. If you're looking for points at that position, Darren Waller's been about as nice of a surprise as you can get, being able to have him as your number 1 guy when you think, if you're in like a 10-team league, not everybody even has a true number 1 tight end on their roster. You're looking for like streaming options every week, and Darren Waller's been a very nice surprise at that position. Going against Cincinnati, a good matchup both on the ground and through the air. Darren Waller's been their most consistent option. I mean, Tyrell Williams has been good. He's missed some time. Hunter Renfrow has been a pretty nice surprise as a rookie that they took a chance on. But Darren Waller's been there week in and week out, and he's doing it on the most consistent basis through the passing game, and I think that continues against Cincinnati.
Yeah, I've Waller as my tight end 4. I have Kelsey at my number 3, actually going against the Los Angeles Chargers. kind of what I said about Hunter Henry, you can apply it to Travis Kelce. Kelce obviously is a more established tight end in the NFL. He's one of your top 3 consensus guys every week. Kelce's having himself a really nice year. I think he's tight end 2 or tight end 3, just depending on what league you play. But he's definitely been getting his production up. He's continued his success from the last couple of years, and he really hasn't let a whole lot of people down going into 2019. So yeah, I really like the matchup, man. I really can't talk to him. I really like the matchup against the Chargers this week. I think he's going to see plenty of volume for him to kind of continue his average of, I believe it's like 13 or 14 fantasy points.
Yeah, that's my number 4. Any other week he would be higher, but I just love the matchup for the guys in front of him. But if you're looking just for consistency, Travis Kelce gives you that, especially when Patrick Mahomes is on the field, especially when Tyreek Hill's on the field. It opens things up for him across the middle of the field where he wants to eat. And for a tight end, too, he offers a little bit more of a vertical threat than most. He's not strictly the go to the soft spots in the middle of the field and receive the ball. He can stretch the field for you as well from that spot, which not a lot of guys at the tight end position do. And, yeah, he's my tight end 4 going against the Chargers. And just to wrap mine up, if Kittle does play, I said he's my number 2, so that would make Mark Andrews my number 5. If Kittle were to sit, everybody moves up a spot, and Zach Ertz going against New England is my number 5. Obviously, not that great of a matchup. It's just you went to the tight end position. I didn't know who else to throw there, and Ertz is coming off a pretty decent game in their last time out. They had a bye week last week, but the week prior had over 100 yards receiving and a touchdown, so hopefully him and Carson Wentz are finally getting on the same page. I think that Nick Foles might have given him a call, Wentz, and said, listen, that guy's pretty good, so use him.
Yeah, it's been kind of hard for me to trust Ertz in the last couple weeks. Like you pointed to, he had a 100-yard game, and they're coming off the bye week, so that's certainly helpful for Zach Ertz owners. I have Jared Cook in my number 5 spot. Like you said, I'm just throwing a dart. Jared Cook playing for the Saints is in what we expect to be a high volume matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Supposed to be a really high scoring game. Drew Brees has shown some love to Jared Cook before he had gotten hurt. Does that continue? We'll see. But at the tight end position, I mean, you can't go wrong with putting Jared Cook in a lineup, especially if you don't have one of the top 3 consensus guys every week.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of common names. When you get down to number 5, as you mentioned the word dart throw, that's pretty much what it is at that position. You don't really have 5 consistent tight ends from a fantasy standpoint this year. So, okay. So waiver wire ads. Most people, I mean, it's Wednesday today, so you've already had to make your waiver wire moves. So we'll tell you why you should have got these guys as opposed to who you should get, because at this point you either got them or you didn't. So my quarterback, kind of mentioned already in the show because of Christian McCaffrey. Kyle Allen is only owned in 16% of the leagues. He's doing against Atlanta this week, which is a pretty solid matchup. Obviously you expect Christian McCaffrey to be the workhorse there, but Carolina does have some decent weapons outside of Christian McCaffrey as well, and DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel. Kyle Allen against Atlanta, I think, is a pretty solid option. They actually have him as a top 7 projected quarterback this week due to that matchup. So owning just 16% of Yahoo leagues, you're going to do a lot worse than that if you're looking for a quarterback this week, whether it be due to a bye week or maybe you're a Matthew Stafford owner and you don't know what's going on with his back. I think that Kyle Allen's a great option for you.
No, not a bad one at all. My quarterback is going to be Derek Carr, owned 45% of leagues, going against the Bengals this week. We've hyped up this Bengals matchup for pretty much almost any Raiders skill player. That goes the same for quarterbacks. Derek Carr. They've allowed 23 points on average to fantasy quarterbacks. I fully expect that to continue. Derek Carr is actually having himself a pretty decent year so far throwing the football. Like you said, Antonio Brown left, other people stepped up. Whether it be Tyrell Williams or Hunter Renfrow or Darren Waller, even a Josh Jacobs in the passing game. Derek Carr has certainly stepped up, and he has the Raiders and contending for a playoff spot right now. So Derek Carr definitely my guy to pick up 45% in the ESPN leagues.
I'm surprised it's that low still, to be honest. Wow. My running back is going to be Brian Hill, the Atlanta running back, going against Carolina. He's in just 6% of the leagues, which is not really surprising. I mean, to start the season, he's like their third or fourth option. But Devontae Freeman's going to miss some time. Ito Smith's already on IR, so he's going to be the guy, pretty much. I don't know what, role, if at all, we see from Quadre Olison to take away from him, but Brian Hill's going to be the guy that, we saw him get 20 touches when Devontae Freeman got hurt, so I would expect that again going against Carolina. And I don't think that he's going to necessarily have, a monster game or anything like that. But if a guy's getting 20 touches for a team and you're looking for a running back, you can't ask for anything more than 20 touches. Like, that's heaven right there for fantasy owner to be able to pull a guy off waivers.
Volume is king, baby.
Yeah.
Volume is king, especially for a guy like that coming off waivers. He's my running back as well. He's actually under 45% of ESPN leagues right now.
Oh, wow.
So Devontae Freeman is doubtful. Looks like he's probably not going to play next week. Like you alluded to, he had 20 carries last week, and he caught a couple passes, one of them being a touchdown from Matt Ryan. What more can you ask for coming off the waivers like that, especially at a running back position, where, if a guy is somewhat doing well, he's going to be picked up. So, get him while you can, I guess, at least for this week or the next couple weeks.
Yeah. See, okay, so I did mine. I can't imagine it jumped that much yesterday, but did you look today and put him in your notes? Because I'm sure he's owned in more than 6% now, but I did my notes yesterday, so that makes sense. Because I'm sure that a ton of people picked him up for waiver wires this week. So
definitely, yeah.
My wide receiver, who I would also expect made a jump from this number, Hunter Renfrow, as we mentioned, they're going against Cincinnati. If you're in a PPR league, boom, he's going to catch. You know what? I'm going to make a little prediction here and say he's going to catch 7 passes against Cincinnati.
Wow.
Yeah. He's only owned in 10% of Yahoo leagues, and I was looking for, we typically go for like under 50%, around the 50% mark. This week, all my guys are owned in less than 35% of leagues, so I was looking for guys that are really not owned to help people out. Hunter Renfrow, as I mentioned, owned in just 10% of Yahoo leagues. I think there's a lot of value there this week against Cincinnati as a flex option.
Renfro's season high in catches was 6 against the Lions 2 weeks ago, so that would be season high for him.
Against Cincinnati, it's happening.
There's one team that's going to happen against. It's going to be the Bengals, that's for sure.
They play the Bengals and Jets the next 2 weeks, and I hate it because they're right there in the match with the Steelers.
Yep. So we'll see. My receiver is going to take you and probably everybody else off guard, but I feel like now is the time to get him. It's going to be Deontay Johnson for the Steelers. I feel like nobody outside the 412 instead of around the 412. Nobody outside the 412 kind of understands what's happening in Pittsburgh right now. So Juju Smith-Schuster isn't producing. James Washington isn't living up to his expectations. Deontay Johnson, the rookie from Toledo, has slowly but surely been creeping his way into the Steelers lineup. And, man, he's already one of the best route runners on the team. He's this young, fast, electric kid. And, he's starting to accumulate more and more time. That connection with Mason Rudolph is starting to occur. And while he may not pop off for like a 15 or 20-point game this week, he's definitely a guy that you're going to want to stash on your bench come playoff time. Because should Juju or James Washington or kind of anything happen to one of those guys, Deontay Johnson's kind of like ceiling is going to skyrocket. Only owned in 13% of leagues right now. If you have the bench depth, go and get him right now.
Yeah, I actually have Deontay already in the league. As you mentioned, the route running's there. Even when the numbers aren't there, it really doesn't take much other than watching tape to see what he's been doing to cornerbacks pretty consistently. As you mentioned, week by week, he's obviously getting better. Him and Mason are putting it together more, those two. But going back to the beginning of the season, we could see that he was already, on track, and the way that he runs his routes, they're so clean. He beats quarterbacks. It just makes it look easy. Baldy's breakdowns, Brian Baldinger was putting out some tape of him, and even when he's not catching the ball, it's still just so easy to appreciate what he's doing. And even like you mentioned, James Washington, the tape that of his touchdown catch that he had against the Rams. I like the way that Brian Baldinger put it, was that right now what's happening in Pittsburgh is that they're developing these young receivers and also somehow winning games doing it. So, but yeah, just from a fantasy perspective, though, Deontay Johnson's an interesting stash. I feel like, the game against the Rams, the Steelers' offense was, they obviously dropped 5 passes and they fumbled twice, but like the flashes were starting. Like I feel like I was actually watching some progression from an offensive standpoint from them. And I don't know. James Washington doesn't fumble that ball. It would have been interesting to see how the rest of that drive would have gone. But yeah, I feel like things are starting to come together for the offense. And with the fact that Juju is the guy that defenses are obviously like trying to shut down, at least from the wide receiver standpoint, Deontay Johnson is going to be the biggest beneficiary of that, in my opinion. So I'm definitely on board with you in that if he is available, I would pick him up and stash him and see if this Pittsburgh offense continues to figure it out, because their schedule down the stretch too is also very favorable.
Took the words right out of my mouth, man.
Yeah. Okay. So my tight end, and there wasn't much out there when I was looking at this, and I feel like there never is. I mean, we talked about the tight end position and the lack of fantasy value at that position. I went with Kyle Rudolph. He's on just 34% of leagues, just because he's caught a couple. 2 straight weeks he's caught touchdowns. He had 2 last week. Yeah. Like I said, only just 34% of leads. He's facing Denver this week, which, I mean, from a matchup standpoint, isn't the greatest. But I'm just, banking on, at that position, a guy that has produced the last couple weeks and hoping that him and Kirk just continue to be on the same page. And they were only 1-yard touchdowns, too. So it's not like, but if they get into the red zone, it shows me at least that Kirk is looking his way. So, I'm not going to guarantee by any means that he's catching another touchdown this week. But if they get into the red zone, I know that Kirk is definitely going to be looking for him.
Well, his nickname is Rudolph the Red Zone Reindeer for a reason. Whether it be a 20 yards or 1-yard touchdowns, he's still getting those red zone targets. Exactly what you talked about. Just kind of taking a shot in the dark here, but kind of a decent shot in the dark. He's scored at least 11 points the last 3 out of 4 weeks. Granted. He is a extremely touchdown dependent tight end. It's better to score touchdowns and get those points than to not to. If you're kind of scavenging the waiver wire this week, you can do a lot worse than Kyle Rudolph.
True. How many? What's his percentage owned in ESPN?
35.
Okay, about the same actually.
Yep.
Okay, so studs of week 10. I know we typically go back and forth, but I'm going to give you my whole team, and then you give me your whole team. So my studs of the week. At quarterback, Daniel Jones. He scored 32.32 points. He was projected 16, so he pretty much doubled that. At running back, Ronald Jones, who was projected 11 and scored 22.6. Bruce Arians finally named him the starter going into their last game, and it paid huge dividends. They spent a second-round pick on him, so they're pretty much... and he was inactive at times last year. So, really, up until, this point where we're starting to see some flashes, he's looked like a total bust. But Bruce Arians finally naming him the starter. I don't know. It looks like it lit a fire under him. And he definitely had his best game as a pro last week. Will it continue? I don't know. I mean, that's pretty much dependent on quarterback play, in my opinion, because you never know what you're getting from Jameis. But at wide receiver, Christian Kirk, who scored 3 touchdowns, 37.8 fantasy points while being only projected 12.38. And then a tight end, really wasn't any other option for me here other than Jacob Hollister, who was projected for 4.5 and scored 20, caught a couple touchdowns. And really, it's just insane because when the Seahawks lost Will Dissly, you thought they're not getting anything from the tight end position. The only 2 other tight ends on that roster are blocking tight ends. But Jacob Hollister has come in there and now has 3 touchdowns total in the last 2 weeks and is actually providing fantasy value at that position for the Seahawks right now.
Yeah, so we actually have the exact same rundown. Daniel Jones, Ronald Jones, Christian Kirk,
nice.
Hollister. I did add Darius Slayton at the receiver position,
Honorable
34
mention.
points. Yeah, honorable mention. Another honorable mention, tight end O.J. Howard, who finally did something this year, so good for him.
I picked him up, actually. I put a waiver claim in, and
really?
Yeah, it might come back to bite me, but I needed a tight end this week with Hooper out. So, and actually now it looks like the foreseeable future. So,
true. Got to do what you got to do, man.
Yeah, I mean,
the talent is there, and that's kind of the most frustrating part for fantasy owners. Like it's there, you will see flashes of OJ Howard, that can be a top 5 tight end in the league, but man, the production is just not there.
Yeah, and I guess the hope is that they spent their bye week trying to get him more involved, and it showed last week, and hope it continues. Because that was just a huge talking point was, what are they doing? They got to get him more involved. The opportunity should be ample with the fact that Godwin and Evans should be the focus of every defense. Yep. And he should be wide open every single time. But,
completely
okay, my duds of the week. At quarterback, Drew Brees scored 5.48 points while being projected 24.01. At running back, Mark Ingram projected for 13.25. He scored 9.4, which isn't bad. I was looking at the position, and I had Mark Ingram as a top 5 play last week, so that kind of played into it. At wide receiver, this one's easy. Saw it in person. Cooper Kupp projected for 18, scored 0. So, I mean, wow. And then Chris Herndon. This one's more about, he's only projected 6.33, but he scored just 1.7 and got hurt again, which is the most important part there. The dude has been on the field all of, a quarter this season. So, he hurt his ribs and is out for the foreseeable future, according to Adam Gase. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was just shut down the rest of the year. But, yeah, it's just been a disastrous season for a guy who showed some flashes last year. And, like I mentioned, with like 10 to 12 team leagues and there not being that many top quality tight ends, even with the suspension, he was probably being drafted for teams to hopefully be their tight end 1 once he did come back with what he showed last year. So it's just been very disappointing, and now he's hurt again.
Yeah, I Evan Ingram got hurt last week, so I picked up Herndon, and I wasn't too happy to see he only got 1 point. He's also in my dud list for week 10. Aaron Rodgers is my quarterback. Only 9 points. Granted, 9 points for some quarterbacks isn't too terrible of a day. But given what we expect out of Aaron Rodgers on a week-to-week basis, certainly not acceptable from fantasy owners. Running back, I have a two-way tie for Ezekiel Elliott and Saquon Barkley. Zeke got a whopping 7 points, and Barkley got a whopping 8 points. Both are just bottled up the entire game. Saquon a little bit more attributed to the injury. There's a lot of question marks around him and kind of his future, at least in the next couple of weeks. But, yeah, certainly disappointing. You mentioned Cooper Kupp with the 0 points. I had him alongside with Juju Smith-Schuster and Stephon Diggs. Both got 7 points last week, so extremely disappointing. And then, like we talked about, Chris Herndon 1 point for the tight end position.
All right. A lot of the same names there. Not used to seeing the same names there for us. And the studs and duds. All right, so you must starts for the week. Once again, I'll just run through my entire team here at each position. At quarterback, Lamar Jackson going against Houston. That's easy money. Like we mentioned, probably quarterback 1 for us for the foreseeable future, regardless of the matchup. Just what he brings through the air as well as on the ground, knowing that he's going to give you 50-plus rushing yards every game. My running back, as I mentioned, with how high I am on this week, I love the matchup. It's probably the best matchup a running back can have this week. Josh Jacobs going in Cincinnati. Wide receiver Michael Thomas, he's going to get 15 targets. He'll probably catch 15 of those targets against Tampa Bay. And then at tight end, Hunter Henry going against Kansas City. As I already mentioned, when healthy, he's one of the best. He did get hurt earlier in the season, but ever since then he's shown no signs of slowing down. He looks like the exact tight end that we thought he was going to be this year as long as he stayed healthy. And coming off another good performance, really just a solid tight end at a position that you never know what you're getting. So Hunter Henry against Kansas City is my must start.
Yeah, Josh Allen is my must start this week. Like I said earlier in the episode, any team going against the Miami Dolphins can kind of be held in a brighter light than pretty much anybody else. Josh Allen, a dual threat quarterback, can get it done on both, the passing and rushing attack. Gotta love the upside for fantasy points there. Running back, it's going to be Christian McCaffrey versus Atlanta. I know that's the easy home run hit. Kind of leave the fruit hanging low from the tree for me to grab. But I mean, it's true. He produces 25 points magically somehow every week. I want to say Michael Thomas, obviously, receiver one, but Chris Godwin is going to be my must start this week. I think he's due for a huge game, like you and I talked about earlier. Just a guy he's getting an incredible matchup as is, but with Marshawn Lattimore being focused more so on Mike Evans following him around, he's due for another big game this week. Tight end position, I'm going to go like you said, Hunter Henry. What a guy. He's responded very well to being hurt the last couple weeks. Before he started against the Steelers, caught 2 touchdowns, kind of rest is history from there.
Yep. All right, so over-under. I actually used my must-starts for my over-under to see what you thought about my must-starts this week. So, Lamar Jackson, over-under 300 total yards against Houston.
I'll go over. Combined, right? Like passing and rushing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll go over. He's a guy. I don't expect him to get 100 yards every week, but I do think what he doesn't necessarily accomplish in the rushing category, he could do with his arm. I think he's got one of the more friendly arms in the league when it comes to being able to pinpoint balls, especially deep. I'm not too big of a fan of his accuracy, especially on like short and like intermediate routes, but he can still get the ball to receivers.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, I guess I'll just do all mine, then you can give me all yours.
Okay.
So over or under 4.5 receptions for Josh Jacobs.
Man, I feel like against the Bengals, I'll take the over, just because you really got to like what this Raiders offense can do. They're starting to put together the pieces right now. Like you alluded to earlier, Josh Jacobs is starting to become more of a pass-catching running back. Granted, they do have Jalen Richard, but, you mentioned that the Raiders are starting to kind of build Jacobs more into their solidified offense. So, yeah, I'll definitely take that.
Yeah, so he has 3 games where he has 3, but he has never had 4. So
interesting. And you put it at 4.5?
4.5, yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay, so over under 115 yards for Michael Thomas.
Man, I feel like he's hit 115 almost every week this year. So I got to pound the over, especially if we're hyping him up like, he's the next coming of Jerry Rice, like we have been on the show.
Yeah, so 115, he's done that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games. So half of the games he's caught that. He's had 115 yards.
Interesting. Yeah, have they played Tampa Bay yet, or is this the first time?
They have played Tampa Bay. They played them week 5. He had 182 and 2 touchdowns.
I'll definitely take that.
Okay, and then go back to my notes. My tight end is Hunter Henry. Pretty much as he catch a touchdown, over under 0.5 touchdowns.
Hunter Henry plays the Chiefs. I feel like he's not a very touchdown dependent guy, and I know we're not talking about production here, but I feel like the Chargers aren't keen to necessarily like target him in the red zone. Although last week he did catch a touchdown against the Raiders. I'm going to say no. I don't think he catches a touchdown this week.
Okay. Actually, before you go, I have a bonus question for you. Over or under 12.5 fantasy points for the New England defense? Because they're my defense.
Shout out to them, first of all. They've won me a handful of games this year. But Philadelphia Eagles, they're on the road, right?
Yeah, is that Philadelphia? Yes.
Carson Wentz is healthy. Deshaun Jackson is not healthy. I'll go over.
Yeah, okay, so last week they only had 4 points going against, or their last game, I should say. They only had 4 points going against Baltimore. Week 1 against Pittsburgh, they had 10. Every other week, they've surpassed that.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't think Philadelphia kind of presents the same challenges as like a like Pittsburgh or a Baltimore defense does. Sorry, offense.
Yeah. Now, granted, in between those, they had the best matchups. I mean, literally, they played the team that gives up the most points to defenses, meaning the worst offenses, twice in the Jets. Miami, who's second once. Buffalo, who's 10th. Washington, who's 5th. The Giants, who are 3rd, and Cleveland, who's 7th. So, I mean, the schedule is very friendly to them, and Philadelphia is the 10th best offense in terms of not giving up points to defenses. They don't necessarily turn the ball over or take sacks, but they also haven't played a defense like New England. So, maybe people are kind of thinking New England's defense wasn't, as good as their schedule showed them to be. But this is, Baltimore was a pretty good test. Philadelphia is another pretty decent test, so we'll see.
Yeah, people definitely have their doubts about the Patriots, and we'll see with their schedule coming up. I believe during the fantasy playoffs, they play teams like the Chiefs and then one other really solid offense as well.
They play Houston. They also play Dallas and Houston.
Dallas and Houston, that's who.
Yeah, their next 4 games are Philly, Dallas, Houston, KC.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll see if they hold up. I'm not very confident in them. I think I might kind of try to ship them to somebody, kind of use them as a valuable trade piece. But yeah, we'll see. The proof is in the pudding, like Mike Tomlin would say.
Yeah.
For sure. So my over-unders for you, starting with the quarterback, Drew Brees, over under 15 fantasy points.
Over. He's my quarterback 2 this week. Going against Tampa Bay, I think that they have a huge game. Like I mentioned, coming off a pretty abysmal game for their offense against Atlanta. Really just inexcusable what happened at home against Atlanta, but I think this is a right-to-ship moment for the offense. Going against another division opponent, they want to get things right and prove that, last week was just a fluke. Like you mentioned, coming off a bye the week prior. So I think that this week they're able to get back on track. So I'll definitely say over for 15 points.
Gotcha, yeah, and that certainly is a low number for Drew Brees, but a lot of people are starting to kind of temper their expectations for the Saints moving forward, especially after what happened last week versus a then 1-8 Falcons team.
Mm-hmm.
So running back, David Johnson, 10 touches.
Ooh,
touches.
Man.
This is a big one because there's a lot of stuff circling around David Johnson this week, especially after we found out that he got benched in the fourth quarter last week.
Yeah, Cliff is a big fan of Kenyon Drake.
Yep.
And I know, maybe a lot of it's just, I might be reading too much into it, but maybe he just doesn't want to, reveal his cards. Maybe he thinks that he can kind of get away with hyping up Drake, and then all of a sudden teams are planning for that, and he throws David Johnson back at him. 10 touches. See, that is exactly kind of where I think the number will be, because I think that Drake is definitely going to get about 10 himself. I'll say over, reluctantly.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where you're going to hold your breath and hope trends don't continue from one week to another. But yeah, like you said, Cliff really likes Kenyon Drake. David Johnson isn't exactly, the teacher's pet right now in Arizona. So we'll see. The talent is still there. He's still, a name brand running back. You paid him last year or the year prior, I'm not sure when, but you still gave him a significant amount of money, so you definitely still want to try to use him, but we'll see. Sorry, not running back. Receiver, Julian Edelman, 10 targets. I already kind of brought this up earlier in the show, but like you said, Philadelphia has a pretty abysmal defense, so you think he hits double-digit targets again?
Yeah, I'm going to say over. I think, as you mentioned with Julian Edelman, it's like you've seen kind of the wide receiver carousel that happens in New England, people going in and out, but Julian Edelman's always there. The continuity, the stability, you can count on him to be open, especially on third down. And I think that the relationship that him and Tom Brady have is one of the best in the league, as you already mentioned. And I think that 10 targets against one of the worst secondaries in football is definitely going to happen. I think that there's some upside there for like a Philip Dorsett as well. But, yeah, Julian Edelman, I definitely see 10-plus targets. And you're not even talking about receptions. You're just talking about throwing the ball 10 times. So, Yeah, I'll definitely say over.
And then last and probably least, O.J. Howard, 50 yards receiving.
Oh, 50 yards receiving.
Mm-hmm.
I am going to say under, because I think that both the receivers have pretty decent days. Chris Godwin a little bit more than Mike Evans. But I will say that O.J. Howard, I give O.J. Howard a better chance of catching a touchdown than 50 yards.
Yeah, Howard has only eclipsed 50 yards once. Sorry. Not even one time this year. The only time he's hit over 10 fantasy points is when he
Oh, he
caught
didn't
that
have over
touchdown
50 yards
last week.
last year? Okay, I thought he had 50 yards last week. What do you have, like 40?
Something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
you had the catches and then the touchdown with it. He had 14 points last week. I know that. Just make sure my numbers are good.
Why am I getting FaceTime? Hello?
Hello.
What just happened?
I have no idea.
You're on my screen now.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway. O.J. Howard, I will say under 50 yards.
Sorry, he did have over 50 yards receiving, I think, in week 2 or week 3. He had 47 yards last week.
Okay. Yeah. I hate to say, I hope that Jameis Winston and him have figured it out, but as I mentioned, against the Saints, I really like the day for Godwin and Evans, and I would throw money at the possibility of him getting a touchdown over 50 yards.
Right there with you, brother.
Okay, so this is the new thing that we're going to do for this weekend only. Some trade targets to target here right before your deadline for the playoffs. I am an absolute clown. Let's start with that. Let's preface with that. Because my quarterback right here is going to be Jameis Winston. The reason being, weeks 13 through 16, they play Jacksonville, Indianapolis, Detroit, Houston. Not a bad game in there from a quarterback perspective. And those are the weeks that you're going to be in the playoffs. Most likely, if you get a bye, you're talking about him missing Jacksonville too. So in week 13, so you would be talking about Indy, Detroit, Houston for your playoff spots there. And I mean, if you're in the playoffs, hopefully you have a better quarterback than that, anyways. But just picking one guy that I think teams might be willing to trade, so their second quarterback, or maybe he's even available in your league as a free agent. You have to trade for him. I don't know, but either way, I like the matchups down the stretch here. He's obviously got the weapons. I mean, we've been talking about him pretty much all show, so it's really just a matter of him figuring it out, Bruce figuring it out, and yeah, I don't know. I like the stretch run here for Jameis.
If you think you're a clown, I am picking a quarterback that hasn't even played a single down this year. I'm taking Nick Foles as my fantasy quarterback to trade for the playoff schedule. We've seen what Gardner Minshew can do with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and granted, they are two completely different quarterbacks. But you still have to throw the ball to receivers, you still have to hand the ball off to running backs, so on and so forth. Things of that nature. I don't drive carts. The Jaguars play the Chargers, Raiders, and Falcons, weeks 14 through 16. And, that is, while, none of those defenses are horrendous when it comes to defending the pass, but those are very favorable schedules. And Nick Foles is a guy you can go and grab on the waivers right now in most leagues.
Yeah. I like it. Because I like the weapons there, too, and DJ Chark.
Yep, D.D. Westbrook, yep.
D.D. Westbrook, who is coming off a little bit of an injury, but he'll be out there. I don't know. Even Chris Conley, who honestly was actually a name that I wanted for the Steelers, but they ended up signing Moncrief. We saw how that worked out.
I wanted him too.
Yeah. I think it would have worked out nicely, but hey, it is what it is. At running back, and you know what? This guy, I've seen a lot of people down on him. You've already mentioned him once, mainly due to injury, but I actually am in a league where he just got traded, so I threw him on here. James Conner was just traded in a league that I'm in yesterday. So his last few games come against Arizona, Buffalo, and the Jets. The Jets are who he'd be playing in your fantasy championship. So talk about an ideal matchup. That's one if I've ever seen one. And I just got an alert that he is good to go. He's not listed on their final injury report for Thursday Night Football. So nice. But I love the matchups down the stretch here. As you mentioned, even just, for this week, they're going to look to get him heavily involved, you would think. I understand that he was hurt, but he's also hasn't played in 2 games, and these guys have just played on Sunday, so I think that they're going to lean on him even more heavily. Especially, Benny Snell's out. Obviously, they have Jalen Samuels to spell him, but he's done absolutely nothing from a yards per carry standpoint. His value is really in the passing game. I love James Conner down the stretch here, so long as he can stay healthy. And as I mentioned, you get to the fantasy championship with James Conner, he plays the Jets. So,
yeah, we'll see. I'm not too crazy about the Bills matchup.
Right.
I think they have one of the better front sevens, but when James Conner can't get it down on the ground, he catches the ball. So he's healthy. Like you just pointed out, breaking news, not directly reported from us, but James Conner healthy, good to go for Thursday Night Football. My running back is going to be Philip Lindsay. The Broncos play the Texans, Chiefs, and Lions. Weeks 14 through 16 for your fantasy football playoffs. He plays in a offense where they will have a new starting quarterback, probably looking soon, depending on the health of Drew Lock in the next coming weeks. They will likely be down in all of these matchups, and Philip Lindsay is the better pass-catching running back out of the duo of him and Royce Freeman. And Philip actually gets a lot of carries as is, kind of splitting that timeshare in Denver. So Lindsay is a guy I really like. He's kind of a dual-threat guy for me. He's a cheaper version of James Conner, even though I think he's faster. His schedule is really favorable. Like I said, he'll be down in most of these games, if not all of them. And Denver's going to try to look to get him the ball early.
I like it. My wide receiver here, he came out of the gates on fire to start the season. Looked like the best rookie receiver. Since then, it's kind of cooled down, and a lot of it's due to quarterback play. They've switched quarterbacks, and I've seen his ownership go down to about 60% in Yahoo leagues. Terry McLaurin, and they play down the stretch here. Green Bay, Philadelphia, and then the New York Giants would be the championship. And those last two matchups are juicy. They did make a quarterback change, and he now has the quarterback that he had in his last year at Ohio State, Dwayne Haskins, throwing on the ball. I'm curious to see how that connection continues at the NFL level. But, you're really just looking at matchups here, and like I mentioned, Green Bay, Philadelphia, and New York Giants for the number one receiver on a team. I don't think that you can ask for more from that from a matchup perspective. And I don't know. I think that he's more of the receiver that we saw at the beginning of the season and we've seen these last couple weeks. And I think that that's mostly attributable to the quarterback play. I'm not saying that Dwayne Haskins is going to come in and play any better because he really hasn't shown anything great when he has played this year. But I'm just hopeful that college connection will help out Terry McLaurin, at least from a fantasy perspective, and those matchups are juicy.
Yeah, I almost picked McLaurin for my kind of playoff target receiver guy. So, perfect pick right there from you. I ended up going with T.Y. Hilton. Talk about juicy. He plays Tampa Bay, New Orleans, and Carolina. Yeah. Super great playoff schedule. The connection between him and Jacoby Brissett is second to none. The production from T.Y. has been steady, but, substantial this year. As long as T.Y. can stay healthy, that playoff schedule is kind of second to none in the league.
Yeah, and he's going to be coming off an injury. When's he expected back?
That's a great question. I don't know. Let me find out for you.
But yeah, so when I was looking at receivers, I kind of thought about him. I wasn't sure how many teams would be keen on trading him, so I was kind of looking at ownership and saw that McLaurin was only owned in like 60% of Yahoo leagues now, and I'm like, wow, I wish somebody would drop him in one of the leagues I'm in.
See, that's what I'm saying. I feel like T.Y. Hilton's considered a day-to-day, by the way, so he can come back either probably like this week or next week. But like you see these guys, and you're like, I just picked up Terry McLaurin and like waivers, and it's like, dude, like how is he available in your league?
Yeah. And then the tight end, this guy could very well be available as a free agent. I'm not totally sure. Not owned in a ton of leagues, so Noah Fant is my tight end, and I looked at who they played on the stretch, and it's Houston, KC, and Detroit. Noah Fant has been getting more involved every week, as it typically is with rookie tight ends. They don't come out of the gates hot. They kind of progress very slowly in year one. But they're definitely getting more involved, and, it kind of coincides with the absence of Joe Flacco from that offense. Whether it be Brandon Allen or, whoever's going to end up. Brandon Allen won them a game against Cleveland. So, I would expect that he'll be the guy for the rest of the season. I don't know, but they seem to have a pretty decent relationship. And Noah Fant, if he's available in your league, I'd pick him up. If he's not available in your league, he's probably someone's second tight end. If you don't have really any tight end options, he's probably a guy that I'd target the trade for. It's not going to cost you too much, I wouldn't think. So.
Yeah, Fant had a very disappointing start to the season, but you know, he had that one huge game against the Browns, I believe it was, and ever since then, people have really been talking about him. Whether or not he'll come through with the production, we'll see. But the potential is certainly there for Fant to kind of be the tight end that the Broncos drafted him to be. My tight end, moving on to a more kind of established tight end. This guy is not getting a lot of hype, and I understand some reasons why. But Greg Olsen from the Carolina Panthers, his playoff schedule will be the Falcons, Seahawks, and Colts. We're talking about a tight end who he's dealing with a rookie quarterback. A guy who's going to look to the tight end position as a security blanket. I don't expect him to pop off for 20-point games every single one of those weeks. Given the nature of the guys like Christian McCaffrey, Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore, but certainly if you're looking for pristine matchup tight ends, I believe the Falcons and then the Colts are some of the worst defenses in allowing points to tight ends for fantasy purposes. So if you're going strictly based off of matchups, then Greg Olsen's your guy.
Yeah, that's a good one, actually. Guy that was talked about retiring prior to the season. Mm-hmm. But he hasn't yet. That was another guy that I considered. I feel like we just keep talking about how bad the tight end position is, how hard it is to squeeze points out of that position if you don't have one of the top guys. But yeah, Greg Olsen's probably like right in that middle tier. Very well could be like the second tight end on somebody's roster. And if they're willing to trade him, yeah, I mean that's a guy worth acquiring, especially with that schedule down the stretch. Anyway, okay, that pretty much wraps up this. So listen to our advice, and you should walk out of this week 1-0.
Love it. Love it.
All right, so once again, we are part of the Pod Hub Network. You can find us and all the other shows at podhubnetwork.com. Hit them with a follow on Twitter. Hit them with a like on Facebook. Hit them with a follow on Instagram. Hit us with a follow. Hit both of our personals with a follow at Z23Smitty, at Donnie Druin. Head on over to Around the 412's Twitter and check out our pinned tweet on Twitter to find out all the information about Rocking Around the 412 Year 2. We have hit our original goal. But we don't plan on stopping there. We want to raise as much money as possible and help as many families as possible. But I'm proud to say that with the money that we've raised, we're definitely going to be able to help 3 families provide Christmas gifts this year for their kids. So, thank you guys who have donated or shared it. Whatever your contribution has been awesome. And, with about a month to go, I'm happy to say that we hit our original goal. So, you can head on over to our Twitter, check out our pinned tweet, see our mission, share it, donate if you can. Every single dollar that is going to the families. We don't take anything from that, and the prizes are provided through our money. So every single dollar that's donated is going directly to those families, and we provide the prizes for the people that do donate. So this show, Around the 412, is sponsored by Keeks Barbershop. Keeks Barbershop is owned and operated by Christian Circle, and it's located at 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. Open 10 to 7, Tuesday through Friday, Saturday 9 to 4. And every Tuesday he offers $5 off for military personnel, first responders, and nurses. He's also running Keeks Christmas Drive right now. You take a toy, monetary donation, whatever it might be, and you get $5 off your hair service, whether it be that day or your next visit. So really cool stuff going on at Keeks Barbershop as well. Once again, Around the 412 is part of the Pod Hub Network. It's been Smitty and Donnie Druin. Until next time, good luck this week, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.